So we're in 11 honors lit, and Emma just said there's a lot of violence. You mentioned physical violence, abuse, like murder, crimes, abuse, which is a crime, family violence. You mentioned snake bites, which is kind of like when you're living out, but that's still, you know, it's a nature can be violent. What was the other one? The robbery. So you got murder, right? Didn't you mention murder? What was the first thing you mentioned?
I mentioned the dead body that they found.
So you got murder, let's assume it's murder, and you've got robbery, you've got snake bites, and you've got child abuse. That is a very wise point that she's making. That's in the first 12 chapters, and we didn't mention everything. And I said the book's funny. There's nothing funny about any of that. So to be able to put those things together and maintain a kind of sense of humor, and not just dark, but there is that dark humor too. But that's one of the reasons why this book may be as successful as it is. I mean, frankly, who wouldn't want to read a book or see a movie that doesn't have violence and murder and robbery? That sounds terrible, but you know, that's what sells. That's what people want to read.
Because it spikes you're like, oh, wow.
Of course. That's why I have a hard time reading Jane Austen, as did Mark Twain. Jane Austen, nobody ever gets killed. Nobody ever gets robbed. The worst thing that happens in Pride and Prejudice is people say things that make other people angry, and they get jealous, and they run away with, you know, a boyfriend. But it's still a masterpiece in its own way. That doesn't make that worse than Huck Finn or Huck Finn better because it has violence. It just shows you that good writers can take any subject and make it compelling. If it's not compelling, if it's not interesting to you, then something's wrong. Now, in the case of a classic, I'd have to say something's wrong with me. If I'm reading a classic and I don't completely, you know, find it entertaining, part of it could be me. That I just got to develop in my reading and my understanding. And not everybody likes both those books. I happen to like both Pride and Prejudice and Huck Finn. As different as they are, that's my job. So that's a very good point. We just had 2 discussions on this book with the AP classes. And I've told you this before. I learned things from you. Your perspective on these things, Nathan Stevens, he had a perspective about a theme that's obvious, but I had never thought of it before. He said the book begins with robbery. Tom Sawyer ended with robbery, right? Or the robber got caught, and Tom and Huck now have the money at the beginning of chapter 1 of Huck Finn. That's because robbery took place. They are now beneficiaries of that. Tom and Huck play games that involve robbery. The 3 guys on that ship were robbers. We even went so far as to say, what is slavery? But essentially robbing the most essential thing, one of the most essential things you have is your freedom. So I just thought that's really a good comment. That the book, one of the themes of this book is robbery. Con men are robbers. You'll see con men later in the book. So, very, very well done. Good job. Any other thoughts like that? I mean, just why you like it? She said she was entertained. Did you say you're entertained? Even though it's dark. Yeah.
I thought there were lots of different settings in the book.
Good.
There are. That's true about any book. It would be helpful if you were more specific. What do you like about the setting?
What was your
what's
favorite
well
setting?
done?
Yeah.
I like first off, when they were over out in the woods in the cabin in the forest, I liked how Huck made it look like he was murdered by killing the...
You like that?
Yeah.
I liked it too.
I'm not gonna lie.
Why did you like it?
Because he was being very creative with it. Because he didn't want his father Pop to same thing, Pap Pop.
No, 2 different things.
No, same thing.
No,
Yeah.
it's
Finish what you're saying. He didn't want his
I
father.
thought he didn't want his father to know that he was still out there because his father probably would have still kept looking for him, maybe.
And he just snuck right on by him,
So I
right?
think it was a pretty creative way.
All right, Walker, we hadn't even answered any questions yet, so there's nothing to write down yet, but, what does that tell you about Huck?
He's creative. He's an awesome
All
guy.
right, what does creativity tell you about somebody?
Imagination.
Okay, what's another thing, that if you have imagination, what?
Intelligent.
Open-minded.
Exactly. Huck barely knows how to read. Jim doesn't know how to read. You can't even understand Jim half the time. And yet, just because they're not formally educated, and Huck does know how to read and write, because he's been sort of educated, despite that, he's smart. Intelligence and education are not the same thing. In some ways, they are both very educated, but about what things? They don't know anything about the Bible. Remember, we talked about that last week. Huck doesn't know anything about Moses. He doesn't know anything about Aladdin and the magic lamp. He doesn't know that Moses was a real person, Aladdin was a made-up person. It's all the same to him. So he's not educated in those things. But what do Huck and Jim share is educational? What do they know about? Yeah.
They have a lot of practical knowledge.
Yes. Can you give examples?
Street smart.
Yeah,
Can
they,
you have good examples?
they know how to hunt. Like, he was creative with what he did with the tape lug. That was, I guess, that kind of tied into his
Right.
general knowledge of
Right.
just nature and stuff.
The hunting equals surviving, so they know how to survive, fish, and hunt. There's something that you didn't mention that they know a lot about, and you see it in this section as well. In fact, Jim is practically an expert at it, something that he knows, and he didn't learn it from reading a book. What's something that Jim knows a lot about? Huck also. They can actually have conversations about this subject. We talked about it Friday, yeah. Right. And so that's something I want you to write down as a theme. I just wrote some of these down here. Themes are, the nuts and bolts of it is why does Huck father's return, what changes Huck? Those are important. But if we just leave it there, then you know the book, but you don't know the book. You don't know the bigger picture of the book. Superstition is a theme in the book. What do we learn about superstition from Huck and Jim? Now, what is superstition? We talked about it Friday. What did we say superstition was?
It's like kind of believing in like a way you do something or what you don't do will help you. Or
will better yourself.
I think I know what you're getting at, but what you said could apply from everything. What you know helps you, what you don't know hurts you.
Or like
what is it specifically about
having like a ritual or something that you do or wear or that just is your it's kind of your way to just feel confident and know that maybe this is going to help me in whatever I'm about to do.
So the word you haven't used is the word luck. It involves this thing out there that nobody can define called luck, and it can be good luck and it can be bad luck. So is there anything to superstition?
No?
Okay. We talked about it Friday. We admitted that there's actually, it kind of affects the psychology. We can get over that. We're adults. It's not going to ruin our class. What is the psychology behind superstition that actually is useful? Do you remember what we said about that, James? I mean, you wear the lucky shirt and you seem to win. That's ridiculous, is it?
Yes.
James, is that really ridiculous? Is there something actually behind wearing the lucky shirt?
Well, like mentally, like it kind of helps. Like I remember talking about it. I don't remember exactly what you said. Like it just helps like mentally.
Please join us. So there's something to it. That it actually, confidence is a major factor in life and sports. So in this book, was there anything to any of the superstitions? I can imagine asking you a question about superstitions. What actually, in this book, do you see actually working? There's some things they do that we would call superstitions that actually work. Can you think of anything that they do in the book that actually works? And see, I'm varying from this because I'm ready. I know what happened. I've read it, and I don't want to talk about this. I want to talk about the big picture that uses these things. You can't answer my question if you don't know the book. I'm assuming you read the book and you know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Well, it worked, but it wasn't a good thing.
Well, give an example.
But, you know, Huck picked up the snake skin that had been on the ground, and then Jimmy eventually got bit by the snake. But
Okay.
he said not that it was a bad thing, pretty much, that he picked up.
But you're calling that superstition, and there's a yes to that, and there's a no to that. Part of that's not at all superstition. Which part is not superstition?
That, you know, that's a snake skin, there is a snake there.
Well, and they put the snake in the sleeping bag, and what happened that had nothing to do with superstition? The mate of the snake showed up to get the snake. That's pure science. That's how animals work. That's how nature works. But what is superstition is what they do with that afterwards. They say all the bad luck that they'll have after this is due to the snake skin. So you see how superstitions work. How did he know how did Jim know there's gonna be a storm?
The chickens ran west.
Is that superstition? Is it?
It's knowledge.
Well, what do you mean it's knowledge?
Yeah.
What does that have to do with a storm?
Well,
Yeah.
It's the chicken's natural instinct to avoid the storm.
So all you have to do is be a scientist, observe nature, and you can predict the storm. That's not superstition at all. What about pouring salt over your shoulder?
That's superstition.
Right, so superstition is like everything else. Did you realize, now science, I like to think of science, and I like to think of science as observing, experimenting, and drawing conclusions. That's science. Did you know that in March, that the head COVID guy in the United States, worked for the president, said, you don't have to worry about wearing a mask. Wearing masks are not gonna help you, because this thing is transmitted by touching. Don't touch your face, don't put your fingers in your mouth, because that's how, you get it from here, you put it here, it's gonna get in you. The mask is not, they were wrong, because they hadn't observed enough, and they observed more, and they changed. So the first thing was wrong, science was wrong. And then science got caught up with it, and there's still some debate as to how successful this is. If this is working, and most people wear masks, why are the numbers going up? The numbers are going up. We keep hearing that. But we're wearing masks, we're social distancing. What are we doing wrong? Doesn't sound like anything. So science is not absolutely positive about everything at first. It takes time. So even science can sound like superstition, and superstition can sound like science. You understand that? Okay, the book has that in it. So I just want you to follow that. Any other thoughts before we kind of quickly run through this? Any other big thoughts about, we talked about superstition, we talked about the violence. These are actually things that you're gonna need to be able to write about. Anything else you notice? Well, there are other things. I mentioned robbery. We pointed this out, we pointed it out the other day, is that Huck is realistic and Tom is romantic. And that colors their relationship, and the two coming together because they're good friends, that helps both of those two different extremes, because they are extremes. Romanticism is about what you wish things were, idealistic and all that, and realism is about, well, what actually is, and the immediate. Realists are practical, romantics are idealistic. So they're kind of two extremes. And so he makes one of the boys, Tom, romantic, and Huck, realistic. For instance, let me just have a question. Tom has a really good imagination. How does he, at the beginning of the book, exercise that imagination? How does it show? What do they do with that imagination?
The stories he
They-
tells.
And they act out, right? We're gonna be a gang. and we're gonna rob people. We're gonna rob some Arabs, and we're gonna rob, who are gonna have elephants. And they show up, and there are no Arabs, and there are no elephants, as Huck was told there would be. There's just a Sunday school. And Huck is really disappointed, because Tom's imagination is focused on games. Let's play games with this. This is just fun. When Huck breaks out of the house in the woods, I don't know if we mentioned, I've been talking about it all morning, so I can't remember. But what does he do? What does he try to do? I mean, he doesn't try to do. What does he do? He's outside. He was inside, and he figured out a way to get outside. Isn't that the purpose of escape? Find some way out of there and leave. He doesn't do that. What does he do instead once he gets outside? What does he do? So he creates this elaborate story, as Walker called it. You're right, it's a story, right? It's a made fiction story. Why does he do it then? For fun and games like Tom?
So that way he can fully get away.
What do you mean fully get it? He's already free, so what's he thinking that will help him with? Yeah.
He doesn't wanna be trapped.
It's very smart. So you see that example of Tom is fun and games, but Huck, he has an imagination too. And again, I'm kind of all over the place, but I'm trying to get you to, and I don't notice anybody write anything down. This is actually the more important thing than this. When Huck meets Jim, and Huck decides to go in town to visit this lady he didn't know her, he just picks out a house, and this Loftus lives there. He comes up with another story. What's his story? What's Huck's story? Yeah.
So just for the girl, so he's not recognizable.
So he pretends to be a girl, but it's not for fun and games. It's because he's trying to get information and not get caught. But another theme comes out of here. He does get caught. He gets caught. She realized you're not a girl, and she gave all these reasons why. You caught the thing that you threw. You caught it between your knees instead of in your lap. The way you throw, you don't throw like a girl. I think that was one other
Was there
thing.
his
The
sewing?
sewing the needle and the thread, right? You didn't do it like a girl. So you're not a girl. Who are you? And of course, at that moment, Huck confesses. Oh, my name's Huck Finn. I tried to pretend like I was dead. My father was abusing me. They've been looking for me for like weeks. He didn't do that, Ben. What does he do?
He says he was some, like, whatever it's called.
But despite the details, you can't remember. What does he do? Tell me just what would you call that?
He lies.
Again. So there's another story, but it's to get out of being caught. And do you admire that? I have to admit, I admire it.
I admire it.
And I admire it only because he's using his wits. Not that lying is good, Payne. It'll eventually catch up with you, and all of us, for that matter. It really does. But that's not what that story's about. That story is about being able to think your way out of a problem. And so I really like that aspect of Huck. He's smart. Jim's smart. They're not educated, but I think Payne mentioned they're street smart. They're still smart there. And maybe for good or maybe for bad, but we're not talking, morality and intelligence don't always go together. And so that's just something else I want you to notice. He's very sharp, and he thinks on his feet. Isn't that what we're trying to get you to do?
Think on.
We're trying to get you to think on your feet. You ever heard that? You think in the middle of a situation. You don't have to, let me go home and think about this and I'll come up with an answer. No, you got to come up with an answer right now. And here he is. He does that. That's a sign of intelligence. He uses his imagination. So I'd say he's every bit as smart as Tom, who's much more educated. But I think he's also a little bit more, he's nicer than Tom. Because he doesn't like at first anyway to play tricks on people. Then he changes his mind and plays a trick. Let's just quickly look at this. I'm just going to go around the room quickly. Well, maybe Are there any you don't know? And that's you may say you know them, but you don't know them, so maybe that's not a good way to start there. Let's just quickly go through. Why is Huck's father back in town? Nate?
He wants to get the money.
Robbery. He wants to steal it from Huck. What is it about Huck that bothers the father the most? Yeah.
I don't think I ever got that.
Here, you can have this. What is it that bothers? Yes, Dewey.
It's like kind of bothered that Huck is now like educated.
Yes. It's his education that bothers him.
Thank you.
Try to stay in your seats, guys. You only need 10 more minutes. Out of you. What do we know about Huck's family? Yeah.
That, it's all dead, it's all dead, I mean.
Right. There's that darkness that Emma was talking about. Yeah.
I was gonna just get
Keep going.
So, number 4 was the judge trying to reform Huck? What success does he have? He tries to reform him by being nice to Pap, trying to educate him, stuff like this, but just completely fails.
Because
Perhaps jealous, he can read.
Falls off the roof because he was drinking.
I can't understand a word you just
He
said.
falls off the roof because he was drinking.
Right. That proves that he failed. But what's the moral behind that? Because the judge is like Tom Sawyer. The judge is more of a romantic, and I need for you to write this down, sentimental. I think you can spell it, sentimental, write it down.
That means it's like
Well, if you mean emotional, yes, but I want to add to it, the judge is emotional. He makes decisions kind of on his emotions more than his intellect, but it's also false. Sentimentalism is false. Let me define the difference between sentimentalism and sentiment. Sentiments, you go to a funeral of a friend, family member, and you cry. Those are sentiments, those are emotions. Sentimentalism, you go to a movie, somebody dies, and you cry. That's not real. The movie's not real, but you're crying over something that's not real. We all do it because we're all
Actually,
sentimental in a way.
Real life too.
So that's the difference. And in the book,
Right.
sentimentalism is, Mark Twain doesn't like it. He always makes fun of it. The judge is sentimental. I also said he thought he could take, now some people, you're nice to them and it works. They change. Other people, well, the judge said, and I guess there's some people you can't reform unless from the end of a shotgun. Some people aren't going to reform that way. A realist understands that. You got to punish them. They got to pay for it. You can't just be nice to them. And so the judge is one of the first examples in the book of someone who's sentimental. And I hope you remember that, because that's a theme we're going to trace. We talked about 5, look at 6. We just answered it, and we just answered 6. We answered 7. You know, he actually thought about Tom when he was making his escape. And then number 7, we did that. Number 8, what do the following comments suggest? These are, let me quickly look at, down the village was the river, broad, whole mile broad, and awful still and grand. The sky looks ever so deep when you lay on your back in the moonshine. I never noted before how far a boy can hear on the water such night. We just said that Huck is realistic. But he's in awe of the river. He looks at the river. Is that a romantic? You know, romantics they love nature. Wordsworth loved nature. Thoreau loved nature. Keats loved nature. 2 Autumn. But they kind of love, at least Keats and Wordsworth, they love kind of an artificial, idealistic view of nature. What is this? You might be the most practical guy in the world, but you see a sunset, you're going to stop and look at it. So my point here is I think that's an example of just real sentiments. real appreciation of beauty. You don't have to be a romantic to appreciate a sunset or the ocean. If you think about it all the time and idealize it, then you might be a romantic, but I don't think that's necessarily romantic.
Do you identify more of a realist or romantic?
Probably romantic. I probably do. I see things as they ought to be. I'm idealistic, and I think things are not this way. I wish they were, and it bothers me they're not this way.
What about you?
I don't really know them well enough for me to decide.
I don't think you can live without being realistic, but I think if that's all you are, you're missing out a lot, because, you know, the life should stimulate the imagination in a good way, you know, so that you're using what God gave you. We're not done. Let's do quick. Why did Jim run away? Number 8.
Slave.
I didn't ask you that question because I knew what I'd get to get his freedom, but that's not why he ran away. I mean, it is, of course. Do you know, Hartley?
He overheard Miss Watson gonna sell him as slave.
Yes. He was gonna sell him down the river. And so he didn't want to get sold. He would have stayed as a slave in Missouri. He didn't want to be a slave separated from his family in Louisiana or Arkansas. So that was a good answer. We talked about this. Why didn't Jim just cross the river to the other side? I don't know if we talked about this or not.
Is there people there that just catch and bring it back?
Because of the fugitive slave law, which you studied in Ms. Roberts' class. Illinois is a free state. Missouri is a slave state. But the law allowed people to return runaway slaves. Okay, 3, let's do this quickly. What did he see in the house? And that was motivated by Tom in some degree. You know, Tom would want to explore the house. What did he see?
The dead body.
A dead body. We didn't mention this. In talking to Ms. Loftus, what does he learn about Pap and Jim? The same thing about both of them.
They have a bounty.
They're both missing, and people are looking for them. Yeah.
2,000,
They're
3,000.
also,
Huh?
2,000,
suspects.
3,000.
All right, go ahead.
They're also suspects in a murder trial.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they think, well, they know Huck has been murdered, right? That's what Huck wanted him to know. So they're looking for the murderer, and who does it look like might have done it? Jim. And they don't think of Pat.
He ran away the same night.
That's right, so they
That's just
think
a
maybe
horrible
Jim did.
coincidence, you know? Makes me so sad.
We're gonna skip 5, 6, 7. We talked about the prediction of the storm. That's number 7. Number 6. Here's the superstition again. They send loaves of bread floating down the river. Could that find a dead person?
Heck no.
I don't think
They're
so either.
dead.
And yet what happened? It does.
It does.
It does find a dead person. What do they shoot the cannons? Could that find a dead body underneath the river? Yes. The vibrations could cause the body perhaps to rise. So you see there's a mixture of the superstitious and the practical. We know about the snake skin and about what happened. We know about Mrs. Loftus, number 9. Number 10, we've looped on these. 11, he can think on his feet. Number 12, very important, we'll end on this. When Huck comes back from Ms. Loftus, knowing that there are people looking for Jim, because they think Jim is run away, but they think he killed Huck. Listen, what is he says the words to Jim. Listen, they're after us. Why is that significant? Yes.
Because he says us.
Hang on, listen to her. Well, why is that significant?
Because now it's like we're in it together as like a team.
Yes, but they're not after both of them. Because why aren't they after both of them?
Because they think
Huck is dead. They're only after Jim, and yet Huck identifies with Jim so much that he says they're after us. All right, well, there's a little more. We need to look at that thing. I'll see you tomorrow. There's nothing due the Tuesday we get back, but there will be something due the Friday we get back. So if you wanna read, I'll talk about that. Don't go yet. I'll talk about that later.
Look at Sky Point, look at Spy